Welcome to r/EntitledPeople, where we share stories from your lives about people who think the rules don't apply to them, and they should get what they want. Thank you, friends, for subscribing to the channel, and for so many likes. And today we have 3 great stories, so subscribe, hit the like button, and let's begin. The first story, the showdown with a belligerent guest. The second story, an Uber driver gets banned from a restaurant. The third story, how I set up a testing department, demanded fair pay, and witnessed the downfall of a greedy company. The first story is, if card no worky, you no checky. Picture me yesterday doing my 311 at my Bilton that has also just recently switched over to the new system, Bop It Deluxe. Side note, this is way better than our previous system on SH. The bugginess shall be patched out in future updates to the simulation. Very excited. Anyhow, yesterday was my first day with Bop It Deluxe, and I was excited and nervous. Everything is going smoothly though, and I tell my Bop It Deluxe rep guy every time he calls that things are going good. In the meantime, I'm on the phone with a guest I'll name Nancy. Not her real name. She calls wanting to switch a room to a suite. We don't have suites. In my confusion, I hear the name Bancy. Not the real name either. And coincidentally, we have a Bancy checking in tomorrow, but she used points. I mistook this reservation as belonging to Nancy, so some confusion ensued, but it was worked out in the end. And I told Nancy, oops, my bad, your reservation is actually perfectly fine. I just did mishear it. Now that's sweet. We don't have those, unfortunately. She asked if we could do a 2-queen with a rollaway instead, and I said, yeah, we can do that for you. This exchange with Nancy happened over numerous phone calls. I advised her to call Bilton. Then her representative, Olivia, called. They were gallivanting around the country for horse shows, and our Nancy was just a customer for them. One phone call was Nancy just telling me that the Bilton customer service representative was a B. Thank you for this information, Nancy. Obligatory side note that if I were to fully explain this situation, my mistake here would have been completely understandable. Nancy was just a share on the reservation, and apparently Bop It Deluxe does not show additional guests on your arrival screen. Quite perplexing indeed, but this is not a big deal now that I know that. Nancy was very nice, but this was my introduction to this legend horse show group. I check in Mike smoothly a few hours later along with Nancy, and I'm informed there is one more guest, who I will name Professor. While Professor's in the lobby speaking to her fellow horse show cohorts, she reveals that she was up since 3 a.m. grading finals. I ask her what she taught, and she told me she teaches literature. Fun. It's time for her check-in now. Her first card declines. I wait a bit, try again, then try again. Wait a bit, try one more time. I'm trying to see if it's a blip with Bop It Deluxe. Interesting. I tell her that there's an issue with her card, and it's declining the first time it declined, but she insists that it's a 0. There's no reason it should be declining. Hence my continued tries. I explain to her that it's still declining and ask if there's another card. While she checks her phone to investigate, all 4 authorizations actually do end up showing on her credit card app as pending. I explain that while they may show as pending, they're declined on my system and we do not have that. It is possible that your app is showing and holding it, but preventing me from accessing it due to possible fraud. Then yelling, I'm in the credit card industry. You don't get to tell me how this works. I know how this works, boasts Professor. I ask for a second card nonetheless. She hands me another one and tells me this is coming straight from my checking. She shows me the balance, $211,000. I'm jealous, honestly. But she tells me, so this does not make me happy. Okay, well, that's kinda not my problem. We need money. We're a business, you see. So I run it, but for only $200, so as not to further anger this woman. Declined again. I hand her the card back and let her know, and she's screaming about how insane this is while her 3 children, teenaged in age, are in the lobby snickering and looking confused. I also at this time have gentlemen that stay here every year, and have for the past 7 years, for the racetrack. They're well known. They're nice. We love them as guests. They were sitting drinking and enjoying their time, but due to the commotion decide to get up and leave. This makes me sad. They're entitled to enjoy and drink in our lobby, especially since they go quiet when I'm on the phone or helping a guest. They are respectful. Anyhow, I decide to pick up my phone and call Bop It Deluxe representative for our migration. He looks on the back end and sees them all showing as declined and that there's no problem with our credit card system and informs me there isn't anything he can do about that, unless I get the manager code and try to pull a manual authorization to see if that would work. I put him on hold and call my manager. My manager does not want to do a manual authorization as it could screw us over, and she tells me that if this lady is being unruly, it is my call on whether she stays or leaves. She backs me up, but she recommends that she leaves. I tell her yes, I was leaning that way. She gives me a weird gut feeling. She's being rude and nasty. We both agree to have this guest stay somewhere else. I go out to my desk and this lady is not in the lobby, but her kids are. I restock the water fridge we have for our built-in boner guests and wait for her. And when she returns, I inform her that due to the issues with the card declining and our inability to pinpoint the source of failure, and since that it is outside of business hours times, so this issue cannot be resolved with her credit card company, we recommend that she look for another hotel to stay at. There are plenty in our area, and they are all great options. We know that other hotels have availability due to call-arounds. She's all the more upset, yelling at me, and then she gives me another card. I tell her no. I ask her to leave. My reasoning for this: she's being disrespectful, yelling, and not acting mature in the lobby. I decide I do not want her as a guest, and don't want her to be disrespecting me this way either. I do not want to run her card because if it declines again, she will be further mad about the amount of money it's holding. I decide I want her elsewhere, knowing my manager supports me in this and agrees with me here. When she presses further, I simply explain that I'm acting out of guidance of my manager, and she needs to leave. So she's further upset. Screaming, yelling, I honestly ignore her until she leaves. At this time it's 11 o'clock. I'm late to closing my shift, so I'm doing so quickly, counting the drawer. Mike comes down and he stands in front of me and asks for an explanation, demanding one as she is his customer. I oblige. I explain the card's declining. I explain that I called our representative and that I spoke to my manager. I explained the decision to have her stay elsewhere came as a result of the cards declining, as well as her rude behavior. Mike tells me, well, she's a woman. She's hot. They get mad. That's what women do. At this time, my replacement NA is in the back watching the cameras. I want to close my shift. I tell Mike that I do not feel the need of discussing this issue further, and I have work to do. Mike asks me if my coworker will speak to him. I tell Mike that if my coworker would like to speak to him, then my coworker will speak to him. At this time, I then turn and fill my coworker in on this information, and then we go out together. While Mike rants about everything, he then criticizes me for how I speak to my customers, because apparently telling him that my coworker has free will and doesn't have to speak to him if he doesn't want to speak to him is unprofessional. Instead of picking a fight, I thank Mike for the advice and tell him I'll look into that. This peeves Mike off further, but honestly, respect is earned, and there's no need to even be speaking to me, let alone my coworker. I'll note that I'm further upset that my coworker is getting roped into this. I don't think he deserves it. I've repeatedly told Mike that my manager will be in the morning. Mike also told me that he'd happily come down and swipe his card, but he was in the shower. I was in the shower for 5 effing minutes. I inform Mike that I'm not omnipotent, and I did not know this. Mike is yelling about what they're supposed to do now. I tell him that they're likely going to get a room at a different hotel. Mike does not appreciate an answer to his rhetorical question. Finally, my coworker speaks. Sorry, sir. This was her and our manager's call, and I back them up and support them. Eloquent. Beautiful. My face is red and I'm flustered from getting yelled at, but my coworker is calm and cool and also not a short, thinnish, young, flustered female. His words penetrate Mike. You guys are both effing the same, he says, waving his hands around and then turning and going upstairs. I, of course, thank my coworker and tell him I can't wait until I have my computer science degree and get to have a job where I'm happily antisocial and do not have to deal with customer service. I admit I'm not too good at it at all. Every time this happens, I tend to just shut down in front of guests when they speak to me rudely. My voice shakes, all that. I warrant their rudeness, but I also don't tolerate being spoken to that way by guests. In our company, and spoken by every manager I've ever had in our management company, if they disrespect any of our staff, our call will be supported by the management. I spoke to my manager today coming into my shift, and she told me that if someone is disrespecting me, my call goes. She said she won't tolerate guests abusing her staff. Admirable. I also spoke to my mom, who used to be in the hotel business as well, and managed a high-end hotel in the area. She said she had these horse show people once, but she decided to just rebate them, and then did not accept them next year at all. She said they were difficult, and she wanted to go the easier route. But if my manager didn't want to do a manual authorization, that's her chosen route of doing things, and neither is better or worse. She sent them over to a different manager the next year, and then our sales office sent them to us this year, so I assume that manager declined them this year. My manager claimed that maybe sales is out to get her, because we've gotten a lot of difficult guests this year from them. I'll be honest, if Professor was nicer and not arguing with me, and more willing to figure out what is causing the issue and work with me on resolving it, finding a working card, all that, I would not have been inclined to have her and her family leave. I eventually just had to resort to explaining that if the card doesn't work, neither do your room keys. Business 101. Anyways, thank you guys for reading my story today. I ended up crying a lot after this shift because of the adrenaline and everything, and I really disliked the entire day yesterday. It was SH. My mom told me crying isn't even worth it over these weirdos, but I'm not a customer service-oriented person. I cannot handle mean people or people yelling at me. Comes with the tism, I suppose, but I really have never been able to handle confrontation and these unruly encounters. All I know is that for minimum wage, I sure as hell do not really care for being yelled at over a mistake that I'm not making. All because, I don't know, they have more money than me, so they're viewing themselves as superior? No, thank you. The second story is Uber driver gets banned. This past Friday seemed like a typical Friday night. Tablets buzzing, dining room filling up, delivery drivers forgetting basic manners. Until one of my servers, Server A, noticed an Uber driver constantly pointing their phone in her direction. Now, I normally don't like to judge complete strangers based on their appearance, but in hindsight, this guy looked the type. After having a different server, Server B, come behind the bar and whisper her concern to me, I moved to a section of my bar so that this driver's back was to me. As Server A went to check up on a table, I clearly saw the Uber Eats driver lift his phone and start snapping pics of Server A from behind. I walk over to my manager, tell him the rundown, and call out Server B's name. Without missing a beat, Server B walks directly towards the Uber Eats driver, demands he stop taking photos of her coworker, and to delete all the photos. He denies it, of course, asks how she could have known, and she points in mine and the manager's directions. While both the manager and I are staring directly at him, he pockets his phone and leaves with his order. My manager then gets on the phone with Uber Eats support, reports the situation, and gets him banned from accepting orders at our restaurant. We also print out a screenshot from the security cameras in case he tries to come in under a different company. The third story is the company collapsed after we quit. So the first company I worked for, I started as an apprentice on an $8K a year. I lived in a small town and cost of living wasn't too high, but this was still just scraping by. A year later, I had set up the entire testing department. At its largest, the company had 12 employees, so wasn't huge. Was liaising on an international product with 18 different offices across 24 localizations, and had an apprentice under me. This got me a whopping salary of $14K, but I was still under the impression that I needed at least 2 years industry experience before I could move on. A year later, and I went for a pay rise, and I asked for what would have been a reasonable, albeit still small salary, and was turned down for it. To make compound things, the company just had its 10-year anniversary, and the owner was invited for a radio interview to discuss it. At one point, the host asked, "So with 10 years of success, are you thinking of giving your staff a raise to celebrate?" And he replied with some smarmy answer about how he already pays his staff what they're worth. Me and another friend handed in our resignation about a week later, knowing we were underpaid and vastly working above our skill grade. They were also trying to hire for months to no avail. The company collapsed about 2 weeks after the end of our notice periods. Moral of the story? If you're driving around in a Range Rover and living in a nice fancy house, maybe you should effing pay your staff what they're worth, or you might be starting over from ground zero pretty sharpish. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to know when the new video comes out, and hit the like button to support the channel.